My son invited me to a company dinner last month. I wore my best suit, rehearsed my words in the mirror, and told myself this would be the night I finally got through to him. The night I'd earn a seat back at his table, not just as a guest, but as a father. What I didn't expect was that by dessert, I'd be the punchline of their jokes. He and his boss laughed at my expense, mocking my age, my outdated advice, and the fact I used to run companies with nothing but a phone line and fax machine. They didn't even try to hide it. I smiled through it, toasted to their future. But as their laughter echoed through the restaurant, something inside me clicked. I wasn't angry. I was done begging for space in a life I helped build. By the following Friday, I had one quiet meeting with a man on the board of directors, a man who still remembered what I'd done for this company decades ago. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I whispered. And that whisper hit harder than any speech, than any. What happened next didn't just silence my son and his boss. It flipped their entire world upside down. You think power comes from speaking louder? No. Sometimes it's the silence that destroys you. Stay with me, and you'll see how respect isn't given by blood or title, but by truth, earned and delivered in the coldest way possible. I was 60 years old when I realized how much of my life I had traded for boardrooms, deals, and closing bells. 3 decades in finance had given me everything except time with my family. My marriage collapsed in the quiet absence of late dinners. My son, David, grew up with my name on birthday cards, but my seat empty at the table. I told myself I was building him a better future. I didn't see the distance until it had hardened into something permanent. Retirement hit me like a silent wave. No conference calls, no deadlines, just an empty house and a phone that didn't ring. I thought of David every day. I knew I'd been gone too long, but I believed there was still time to repair what I'd broken. Over the past year, I'd tried investing in his projects, introducing him to old contacts, praising every career milestone. Sometimes he'd respond with polite thanks. Sometimes not at all. I told myself he was busy. One of the key introductions I made was to Robert Hayes, his current boss. Robert and I had history. 15 years ago, he was a young, frantic executive whose department was on the verge of collapse. I quietly pulled some strings, secured a deal that saved his career. He never spoke of it publicly, but he owed me. That was part of why I thought this dinner might mean something. Perhaps David and Robert wanted to acknowledge our connection. The invitation came in an email from David. Dinner next Friday, company event. You should come. Short, almost casual, but it felt like progress. I ironed my best suit the night before, the same navy pinstripe I wore when I took him to his first baseball game. The restaurant was one of those modern places with low lighting and expensive silence. When I arrived, David greeted me with a handshake, not a hug. Robert was there too, smiling warmly enough to pass for sincerity. The table was set for 6, but the moment I sat down, I realized I wasn't part of the inner circle. At first, everything seemed cordial. Robert raised a glass to David, praising his leadership on a recent project. Colleagues clapped, David smiled, and for a moment, pride swelled in my chest. Maybe this was the start. Maybe all the years apart were finally softening. Then the tone shifted, so subtly at first that I almost missed it. Robert made a joke about how the younger generation is light years ahead of us old school guys. David laughed a little too hard. Soon, the conversation turned into a parade of thinly veiled digs at dated methods and retired legends who didn't understand the modern market. Each time, their eyes slid toward me. It became clear the dinner wasn't about recognition. It was a stage. Robert complimented David's ability to take over where others left off. David grinned, soaking up the praise as if I wasn't even there. I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded on the table. Years in corporate taught me the value of silence. Halfway through the meal, they discussed the project in detail, slipping into technical jargon I knew well. I could have contributed, pointed out risks they were missing, but each time I opened my mouth, the conversation shifted away, leaving me speaking into a void. I began to feel like a guest at someone else's family reunion. The laughter grew more pointed. At one point, Robert leaned back in his chair, gesturing toward me. "Guess some old dogs really can't learn new tricks," he said, smirking. David chuckled, and the table joined in. The words hit harder than I expected, not because of the insult, but because my son didn't defend me. He didn't even look my way. I raised my glass in a small toast, my voice calm. "Well, some old dogs taught the tricks you're using now." A few awkward laughs followed, but the moment passed quickly. They moved on, and I was left with the quiet knowledge that this night wasn't about reconciliation. As dessert arrived, I realized something important. I had come here hoping for a bridge. Instead, I had been given a mirror, one that reflected exactly where I stood in my son's life. I smiled, nodded, and let the night play out. But inside, something had shifted. The ride home was silent, but my mind wasn't. I wasn't angry. I wasn't humiliated. I was resolved. After that dinner, something shifted. I stopped trying so hard, and David stopped pretending. The coldness between us solidified into something measurable. He no longer masked his discomfort around me. Instead, he treated me with the detached politeness one reserves for a distant donor. Our interactions became transactional. If I reached out, he replied with one-liners. If I offered advice, he deflected with buzzwords. But when his department faced funding issues, I was suddenly useful again. "Hey, Dad," he texted one Thursday morning. "Could use your input on a pitch deck. Investors like your kind of background." I told myself it was a step forward. I showed up, reviewed the material, cleaned up their messaging, even flagged a few risky projections. No acknowledgement followed. Just a curt, "Cool, I'll send it to Robert." It didn't take long before I saw the pattern. I wasn't a father in his life. I was a convenience, a financial cushion, a seasoned consultant he could tap when needed. Robert, his boss, played along too, casually name-dropping me in boardrooms and client meetings when it suited him. One day, I overheard Robert on a call with a potential investor. "Yes, we've had feedback from Richard Callahan on this, former CEO of Sterling Group. He's been loosely advising us." Loosely. He said it like I was some washed-up relic lending ghost credibility. I didn't correct him. Not yet. Around the same time, I started hearing whispers about David's project being on the agenda for the next board meeting. I still had friends in high places, people who hadn't forgotten what I'd done for the firm decades ago. They trusted my instincts, even if I wasn't in the room anymore. One of them, a man named Tom Weaver, now a senior board member, called me. "Hey, Rich, what do you know about this Phoenix expansion your son's spearheading?" I paused. "Depends. You want the father's take or the financier's?" "I want the truth. Numbers don't look clean. Something feels dressed up." I told him I'd take a look. That night, I went through David's proposal again. I had already seen it once, but this time I read with different eyes. Strategic eyes. The margins were thinner than they claimed. The market analysis was inflated. Worst of all, they were leveraging unsecured assets to fund the first phase. It was reckless. And David didn't even realize the board was sniffing around. Meanwhile, he kept his distance. I invited him to lunch 3 times. The first time, he said he had meetings. The second, he didn't respond. The third, he wrote, "Let's not force this, Dad. I'm in a good place professionally. Let's leave it there." I stared at that message for a long time. He didn't just not need me. He didn't want me. A week later, we ran into each other at the firm's anniversary gala. He looked sharp in his tailored navy suit, but his expression stiffened when he saw me. Still, he walked over, shook my hand in front of colleagues, played the part. I pulled him aside near the coat check after the event. "David," I said, "you've been distant. I know I wasn't there the way I should have been, but I'm trying now. Can we talk? Just us?" His jaw clenched. "You want to talk? After all these years?" "I do." He took a long breath. "You know what I remember? Not birthdays, not baseball games. I remember Mom coughing so hard she could barely stand, and you weren't there. You were in Tokyo or London or wherever, closing something big, I'm sure. I was the one sitting on the bathroom floor with her. I was 15. I swallowed. She never said a bad word about you," he continued. "But I saw her cry into a towel because she didn't want me to hear. I decided then I'd never let someone make me feel that small again. Not even you." I was stunned. That memory, twisted as it was, had shaped his entire adult resentment. "I didn't know she was that sick," I said quietly. "She hid it from me." He scoffed. "Of course you didn't. You were too busy being important." He walked off before I could say more. That night, I sat in my study until dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many things I'd missed. But one thing was clear. If I couldn't be his father in heart, I would at least teach him the importance of truth, one way or another. It was late on a Wednesday when the final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. I was in my study, half-heartedly sorting through old files when my phone buzzed. A message from Tom Weaver. "Rich, you need to see this. Board packet. Confidential. Phoenix expansion section." I opened the document. My eyes scanned line after line of optimistic projections, clean profit forecasts, and tidy expense summaries. On the surface, it looked airtight, too airtight. Numbers that clean are either the product of a miracle or a cover-up. I'd built my career on knowing which was which. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the financial appendices with public filings. And there it was. Subcontracts shuffled through a shell entity. Deferred liabilities, conveniently excluded from the risk section. Robert Hayes, my son's boss, had his fingerprints all over it. David's name, however, sat proudly on the executive summary in bold letters. David wasn't just a player, he was the face. For the first time in months, I felt a different kind of energy stirring in me. Not the weariness of a father begging for a second chance. This was sharper, colder. Robert was using my son as a shield. And my son, in his arrogance, didn't even realize it. As I scrolled further, another name caught my eye. Board Chairman, Arthur Lang. Arthur Lang. 20 years ago, Sterling Group was on the brink of a hostile takeover. Arthur was the new chairman then, young and barely holding on. I stepped in with a rescue plan that not only saved the firm, but secured Arthur's position for decades to come. I never asked for anything in return. But some debts are remembered, even in silence. Now, my son's future, and perhaps his dignity, sat in Arthur's hands. I closed the file and sat back. I could keep quiet, let the board find out on their own, watch David crash. Or I could step in, not to save him from humiliation, but to save him from being destroyed by the very people he trusted. I realized then I wasn't asking for his forgiveness anymore. I was reclaiming my own respect, and if he learned something in the process, so be it. That was the night the begging ended. The next morning, I went back into my old rhythm. Early coffee, legal pads filled with bullet points, the quiet hum of a strategy forming. I hadn't felt this sharp in years. I reviewed the Phoenix expansion from every angle, cross-checking vendor lists, asset valuations, debt structures. I pulled archived emails and financial notes from my own time in the industry, and in the process, I stumbled onto something I hadn't expected. In an old set of hospital billing records, buried in a charity portfolio, I saw my name on the guarantor line for Elizabeth Callahan, David's mother. I remembered it now. She'd been diagnosed quietly, insisted she didn't want to burden David, didn't want him distracted during finals. She'd sworn me to secrecy, told me to stay in Tokyo and close the deal that would pay for her treatment. I had done exactly what she asked. She never told David, and I never corrected the story. All these years, my son thought I had abandoned them, when in reality, I'd been paying for every bill, arranging specialists, flying back between meetings when she was stable enough for visitors. I leaned back, the weight of 2 decades of silence pressing against me. Robert's deceit was one thing. David's resentment, founded on a lie of omission, was another. Now I had 2 truths to bring to light: the financial fraud in his project and the truth about his mother. But timing was everything. If I laid it all out now, it would look like desperation, a father trying to clear his name. No, this needed precision, a controlled release. I picked up the phone and called Arthur Lang. "Arthur," I said when his deep voice came through. "It's been a while." "Richard Callahan," he said warmly. "The man who saved my career. I owe you a drink, or 100. "I might call in one of those markers," I replied evenly. "It's about Phoenix." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I had a feeling I'd hear from you. Come by the club tomorrow. We'll talk." I hung up, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't stepping back into this as a father seeking reconciliation. I was stepping in as Richard Callahan, the man who once moved markets with a signature. And this time, my signature would move something far more personal. The next morning, I arrived at the club 15 minutes early. Arthur Lang was already seated by the window, sipping black coffee like nothing had changed in 20 years. His tie was loosened, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp as ever. He stood as I approached. "Richard," he said, extending his hand, "you look like hell." "I feel worse," I said, shaking it firmly, "but I've got something you need to see." We sat down. I pulled the folder from my briefcase. No digital copies, no emails, just hard evidence, printed and underlined. I laid out 3 pages, one with the doctored projections, one with subcontractor links to Robert Hayes, and one with a timeline of misleading communication to the board. Arthur scanned them quickly, then again, slower. "You're telling me Hayes is cooking this?" "Not just cooking," I said. "He's using my son as the face. David doesn't see it. He thinks he's running the show. But the real power is sitting behind him, pocketing the risk while David takes the fall." Arthur leaned back, eyes narrowed. We've had concerns. Something about the cash burn didn't sit right, but nothing this concrete. Now you do, I said. You don't have to pull the trigger yet. Just tighten the leash. Watch what leaks. He folded the papers and slid them into his inner jacket pocket. You just gave me the bullet. Let's see if the gun loads itself. The following week, I waited. Tension began to ripple through the company's upper echelons like static before a storm. I didn't make any calls. I didn't check in. I let the weight of the evidence speak in silence. Then the announcement came. A closed-door session of the board, scheduled with short notice. On the surface, it was labeled as a project health review. Internally, it was a quiet reckoning. David had no idea. He texted me the night before, asking about a new potential investor I'd once worked with, as if we were just two colleagues talking strategy. I replied, "Let me know how your board review goes. They're more insightful than you think." No response. The meeting took place on a Tuesday morning, inside the sleek glass walls of the 23rd floor. I wasn't invited, of course, but Arthur had made it clear I'd be near. He had arranged for me to wait in a side room just outside the board chamber. I sat there, not as a father, not as a relic, but as the man holding the thread that could unravel a future. 10 minutes into the meeting, Arthur stepped out, asked me to join him for a moment. He leaned close. "I want to send a message, clean and quiet. Just give me the line." I looked him dead in the eye and whispered, "He sold projections built on air, and Robert backed it with your name. You dig even an inch, you'll find rot." Arthur nodded. "That'll do." He walked back in, closing the frosted door behind him. I never heard what was said next, but I didn't need to. By Thursday, the first shift came. Phoenix expansion was temporarily suspended pending internal review. No press release, just a discreet memo to stakeholders and department heads. David called me that night, voice clipped. "You hear about the delay?" I did. "You know anything about it?" "I know the board doesn't make decisions lightly." He hesitated. "Robert thinks it's politics. Some conservative members worried about optics." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Maybe they're just watching more closely now. That tends to change things." Friday brought the second wave. A new committee had been formed, an internal audit group, quiet, precise, and focused on financial compliance within leadership roles. What David didn't know, and wouldn't learn for weeks, was that Robert's personal expenditures were under review. Travel accounts, consulting fees, offshore payments masked as R&D. The board was no longer just watching, they were dissecting. Robert, sensing the pressure, pulled back. He canceled public briefings, postponed networking events, and began avoiding eye contact in elevators. David noticed, but misread the signs. He thought Robert was overwhelmed, stressed. He had no idea the ground beneath him had already begun to crack. And he certainly didn't know who handed them the crowbar. By the following week, the cracks in Phoenix had turned into canyons. Robert Hayes was summoned to a private board session. No assistance, no aides, no safety net. What began as a routine project update quickly spiraled into an hours-long inquisition. He left the meeting pale, jaw tight, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the hallway. Word spread fast. Phoenix wasn't just delayed, it was on life support. Robert's absence at the next executive briefing was telling. For years, he'd been the confident voice in every room, but now his seat was conspicuously empty. David, meanwhile, was left exposed. His name was still on the project, His mentor, his shield, was slipping out of view. 2 nights later, my phone rang. David's name lit up the screen. "Dad," he said without preamble. His voice was tight. "Something's happening with Phoenix. Robert's acting strange. The board's not returning calls. Do you know anything?" I let the silence linger just long enough to make him uneasy. Boards do what boards do. They protect the company. Maybe they're protecting it from something. He exhaled sharply. "I'm serious. I'm getting calls from investors. They're asking questions I can't answer. What should I do?" I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city lights. "Answer carefully. And remember, truth has a way of surfacing whether we like it or not." There was a pause. "You sound like you know more than you're saying. Or maybe I just know how these things work." He sighed, frustrated. "Thanks, I guess." Then he hung up. I put the phone down, my expression unchanged. He still thought I was standing on the sidelines. That was fine. 2 weeks later came the company's quarterly meeting, a grand affair with department heads, executives, and key board members all in attendance. The auditorium buzzed with murmurs about Phoenix. David sat 3 rows from the front, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. Robert was nowhere to be seen. Arthur Lang stepped to the podium, his voice steady, his presence commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our agenda, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a matter of significant importance to this company's future." The room fell silent. As you all know, the Phoenix expansion has been under review. I am pleased to report that potential risks were identified early enough to prevent serious damage to our firm's financial stability. This is the result of due diligence, vigilance, and... Arthur paused, scanning the room. The timely insight of someone who has always put this company's interests first. I felt every eye shift toward me. Arthur gestured. "Richard Callahan, please stand." I rose slowly. A few polite claps rippled through the audience, but Arthur wasn't finished. "This man saved Sterling Group once before, decades ago, during a crisis most of you have only read about in archives. And more recently, he quietly provided information that prevented the Phoenix expansion from becoming a catastrophic misstep." The applause grew louder. I nodded slightly, my expression calm. Arthur's tone shifted, softer now. "And while I have the floor, there's another truth long overdue." I felt my chest tighten. Many years ago, during a time of personal difficulty, Richard was absent from his family, for reasons not fully understood. What few knew, what I know, is that his absence was in service to someone he loved. While working abroad, he funded and arranged specialized care for his wife, Elizabeth, without public acknowledgement. His discretion was at her request. Gasps murmured through the room. My eyes found David. His expression was frozen, confusion and shock etched in every line of his face. Arthur continued, "Sacrifice is rarely neat. It is often invisible. And in this case, it preserved more than just a company. It preserved a family, whether they knew it or not." Silence hung heavy. Arthur turned back to the audience. "Let this serve as a reminder. Integrity is measured by what we do when no one is looking. And Richard Callahan has exemplified that more than once." The applause this time was thunderous. David's head lowered slightly, as if the weight of the revelation was pressing down on him. Around him, whispers spread like wildfire. I didn't look triumphant. I didn't smirk. I simply sat back down, letting the noise wash over me. The truth had finally surfaced. Not shouted, not forced, just placed calmly and irrevocably into the light. The weeks following the quarterly meeting were a slow, deliberate unraveling of Phoenix's remaining threads. The audit committee moved quickly. Robert Hayes was formally removed from his role under the banner of personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. His exit package was lean, his reputation shredded. David's fate came next. He wasn't fired. Arthur made sure of that. But he was removed from Phoenix and reassigned to a smaller, less visible department. His new title came with less prestige, a smaller office, and a lighter paycheck. The announcement was discreet, sent out in an internal memo that spoke of realignment and opportunity for development. In the quiet language of corporate politics, it meant he'd been spared, but humbled. I read the memo over coffee and set it down without a smile. This wasn't about winning. It was about balance. David didn't call me right away. I didn't expect him to. Humility is a private process, one that doesn't happen on anyone else's schedule. For my part, I stayed silent. I didn't push. I didn't gloat. I didn't bring up the board meeting or Arthur's words. I simply went on with my life. Morning walks, old friends, quiet evenings. Sometimes, I thought about the look on David's face when Arthur told the truth about his mother. The shock, the realization, the years of resentment beginning to shift, if only slightly. I'd learned a long time ago that trust isn't repaired in declarations. It's rebuilt in time, in space, in quiet invitations left unanswered until they're ready to be accepted. 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed. David's name appeared on the screen. I answered. David. There was a pause on the line. Then, can we talk? His voice was softer than I'd heard in years. Of course, I said. He hesitated again. Not on the phone. Can we meet? We met at a small Italian place on the east side of town. Not the expensive kind his firm used for business dinners, but the kind with red check tablecloths and waiters who remembered your order. David arrived, looking older somehow, even though only weeks had passed. He sat down, fidgeting with the menu before setting it aside. I owe you an apology, he said quietly, for a lot of things. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I thought, he exhaled, I thought you just didn't care. About me, about Mom, about anything but your career. I've been carrying that around for so long, I didn't even know how to see you any other way. I nodded. I know. And at the dinner, when Robert and I laughed, he stopped, shook his head. I wasn't just being disrespectful. I was angry. I wanted you to feel small, like I did when I was younger. I kept my expression steady. I didn't know about Mom, about what you did. She never told me. And when Arthur said it at the meeting, he trailed off. I didn't know what to think. I leaned forward slightly. She asked me not to tell you. She didn't want you to worry. And I honored that. Maybe it was the wrong choice, but it was hers, and I respected it. David nodded slowly. His eyes dropped to the table. I was wrong. The waiter brought bread and water. We let the silence sit between us, not heavy, just still. Finally, David spoke again. I'd like to start over, if that's possible. I don't expect you to forget everything I've said, but maybe we could... He stopped, searching for the word, try. I looked at him for a long moment. I saw the same boy I'd left on too many baseball fields, now grown, humbled, and willing to take a step I'd been waiting years to see. I smiled faintly. David, respect is earned, and that goes both ways. He met my eyes. I understand. I reached for my glass. But I'll always leave the light on for you. Something in his expression shifted. Not full forgiveness, not yet, but something softer. We spent the rest of the meal talking, not about the past, but about ordinary things. His new department, my garden, a book I'd been reading. There was no grand reconciliation, no cinematic moment of absolution. Just two men, father and son, sharing a table without the weight of old anger crushing the air between them. And that, I realized, was enough for now. When we left, the air outside was cool. David shook my hand, then hesitated, as if he wanted to say more. "Dinner next week?" he asked. I smiled. "We'll see." He nodded, a small grin breaking through. "Fair enough." I watched him walk away, shoulders a little straighter, steps a little slower. As I turned toward my car, I thought about everything that had led here. The boardrooms, the lies, the silence, the truth. Respect wasn't restored overnight, but the path was open. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for.